parents, and you'll find, and teachers, and whoever is joining us this evening and elsewhere, we'll get started. And we have a full agenda, and I'm controlling the PowerPoint slides, but Mina's here right with me, and we'll share our slides as we go. Our focus is on development and instruction, and we're looking to talk to parents and teachers. Alrighty. You can visit us at our website here at the top. And matter of fact, at this website, you'll see a 47-page handout that will have all of my notes, or pretty near all of my notes that are important today, on a PDF file for you to download. And please do contact us. That's Mina's address and my email address. So there's the extensive handout, and it's just under Bare Handout. Mina, do you want to review our topics? Or?
Sure. We're going to start out with an overview of literacy development. We just have a little bit of information we wanted to share about RTI because it's a major focus in the schools and for remedial instruction. Then we have assessment of the 5 cases, but because we have more than that, we may comment also about other things that we've seen in the other cases. And then literacy development instruction with a focus on phonics, vocabulary, and spelling, just talking about instruction that can be provided that helps support struggling learners or emergent learners, the beginning learners in literacy. Did I miss anything, Dr. Baer?
That's great. And in terms of families, we thought that you might be able to participate this way. We'll sort of stop it at midpoint right after the assessment, but also when you see your own child or when you hear your own child, go ahead and share questions with you, and Amy will help us to field those questions as we go. We're going to sort of have 5 stages that we talk about, and when you think you see your child, go ahead and type in a question if you have it. And then we'll take questions at the end as well. Sorry, there we go. And we both work at the E.L. Cord Foundation Center for Learning and Literacy, and this is our mission: to improve literacy in Nevada and to provide literacy services to children and adults in northern Nevada. Mina, it's really your study that I'm a part of, so would you share a little bit, please?
Sure. We just ask people to give their children a brief spelling inventory and mail that to us, also with data from the school and just a short survey asking them about their child's history as far as education and learning to read. And 18 people were kind enough to participate in that, and they sent those to us, and we just reviewed them. Their ages 6 to 17, and most of them are from the United States. Of the 18, 15 had IEPs, and some of the ones that didn't have IEPs at the time that we started this later got IEPs. Okay?
Mm-hmm. And then we are part of the study, and go ahead and take us through these slides. This is a letter that we send to parents.
Right, just explaining the results of the study and how the study goes, so the parents get a review of what we found and what we found in general over the study.
So we try to understand the spelling and word knowledge and literacy development of the children, and then in return we send it back to parents, this type of report. And another thing that we send is, in this report, is a scope and sequence of the development that we would predict for the child based on the data that we have. And we've also created these reading lists. So if we think that the child is a beginning reader, these are typical books that would be useful for that child.
And we try to update those lists so that you have current ones that are new, so that the children are exposed to the right level, but interesting books.
So we appreciate the families who have been involved. We've learned a good deal and hopefully have been able to share some good learning and activities for their children. Before we go on to the developmental stages, I think I'd like just to say a few points about RTI. That stands for response, to intervention. And now a lot of your children are going to be involved in RTI types of activities. Let me just get this phone. Good. So as you may know, there are 3 tiers. The tier 1 is for the child who is on level, and I think I have a note on that in the previous slide. Tier 2 is a child who has a difficulty and whose difficulty can be sort of addressed in the context of the regular classroom. In the regular classroom. So we're looking at 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. We're looking at small groups of 3 to 6 children, instruction that's targeted and well-researched, and the personnel should be highly trained. Often it's the classroom teacher at Tier 2. Sometimes a push-in special ed specialist comes in. Paraprofessionals come in. And as you know, we often use progress monitoring. So as a family, you're looking for a group of 3 to 6 children to be in that type of setting for Tier 2. We also have Tier 3 settings, and this is the most intensive of all the tier settings. We're looking for less than 3 children in a group, children who are well behind in their literacy, and furthermore, children who are not responding to Tier 2 intervention. This is the special ed that you are becoming familiar with now. Special ed now is looking at, let's get children good, strong instruction as soon as possible and not wait for a lot of testing. Because indeed, we know that learning disabled children learn in pretty much the same way. And if we know that we're losing time if we don't get instruction going right away. So this is a quick look at Tier 3, and you'll be able to come back to this slide. But now the question is, who does not respond to intervention? Some people say 2 to 6% of the school-age kids do not respond to intervention. Some say 20 to 30%. Some say 50%. I would go with the 1.5% of learning disabled students who do not make good progress with a remedial program. I look at Valutino and Scanlon's research, University of Albany, SUNY Albany, State University of New York, Albany, and they gave a good tutoring program to learning disabled kids, and all but 1.5% of the kids responded well to good instruction. In my experience as a remedial person, a remedial teacher of children, I often find that the children that the tutoring is not intense enough, the pacing is not slow enough, and the duration of the tutoring itself is not long enough. So there are real issues that come into play when we look at why children may not respond to good interventions. We're looking at development now, and Mina and I begin our work with a developmental approach. You could take a deficit model, you can look at a difference model, but we tend to look at a delay model, and that allows us to then look at a developmental model. We think that most children are able to learn to read, that they are delayed in their development. There are differences. Now, that's been one of the things that's been interesting with our study of this population, is that we do see some phonological difficulties. And as you saw in the previous slide, 11 out of our 18 have been referred for speech-language difficulties, and 15 of the 18 have been referred for special services through special ed in some way. When there are language difficulties, we often see reading difficulties. We know that children who are identified at 4 years of age with a language difficulty, that nearly all of those children will later have a reading difficulty. Again, RTI encourages us to get started quickly with a developmental approach in our tutoring. We will take this attitude throughout our talk tonight, which is that we believe that there is a synchrony among reading, writing, and spelling. We are asking teachers and parents to consider these 3 aspects of literacy as all part of the same pie. And we'll show you tonight how, or today, that when we're teaching spelling, we're also teaching reading and writing, that they all are mixed together. They are not separate skills so much. And this is a slide of our developmental model. We look at 5 stages of development and the synchrony of these stages. Now, I look across languages at this alphabet pattern, meaning these are the layers of the writing system. And now we look at the stages of reading and spelling, reading and spelling. So this is the stage of reading, and this is the stage of spelling. So the reason that we have been asking families to give our spelling inventory is so that we can understand a little bit better about the phonics that they would benefit from and predict also what kind of reading these children would be experiencing in their development. This is on page 4 of the UNR website handout that I referred you to, and this is where I'll spend a few minutes if that's okay. We look down at the bottom, and this is the emergent stage, and you don't see a sample here, but children are scribbling and drawing at this stage, and they are emergent readers, and we will come back to each of these stages once we get through the assessment section. But this is an overview of the 5 stages of reading at the top with the 5 stages of spelling in the middle. And so we started with the emergent, and this is babyland, kindergarten, and pre-K, hopefully. These are first graders, but it can go further into second grade and third grade if necessary. And so here's the game. If a student spells float, F-L-O-T, we would say that that child is in the letter name stage of spelling. And run your finger all the way up. Run your finger all the way up. We would say that that child is a beginning reader. And that means that that child is a word-by-word reader, that she points to the words as she reads aloud when she reads to herself, monotonic, disfluent, staccato-ish. And I'm making this prediction, it sounds silly, but I'm making this prediction based on the child's spelling. Not just one word, but we have inventories of words that the children spell to help us to understand their phonics development as well as their literacy development. If we go to the right, Mina, are we okay?
Oh, we're perfect.
If we go to the right, we'll see float, F-L-O-W-T, let's pretend, and that child would be in the within-word pattern stage. Run your finger up, and that child is a transitional reader. This is a long stage, actually. It takes longer than we would like. It goes from Nate the Great, dinosaur days, the easy I Can Read books, all the way to the Treehouse Mysteries and the Junabe Jones and the easy chapter books. So this is that stage here, and if we go back a slide, you can see that this transitional stage is supposed to be completed by 4th grade, but we don't play by supposed tos. We're looking at the student's development, and so I'm working in a grant in Chicago and at Promise at-risk schools, and 2/3 of the 6th through 8th graders are still in this stage of transitional reading. So we have 2 more stages left, and these are the upper stages of word knowledge, and they go with the intermediate stage of reading and the advanced stage of reading, and the derivational stage of spelling, and syllables and affixes. Some of our children are in this stage, the syllables and affixes. They can spell long vowel words correctly, but they are learning how to spell 2-syllable words correctly. These children are intermediate readers, and they are falling in love with their favorite genres, if you will. They are addressing study skills, and they're reading at least at a 4th grade level, we'll say. The advanced readers, we're advanced readers as adults, and these children are looking at polysyllabic words and how they're spelled and how to read them. They're also getting into Greek and Latin roots and easy prefixes and suffixes. So this is the developmental model that we have spent many years studying and doing research with, and now we feel fortunate to work with different populations to see how children who have learning difficulties may or may not follow the developmental sequence. And we'll show you some anomalies, if you will, in children's development, but I think we can first bank on development and work from there. The next body of slides looks at assessment, and the assessment that we're looking at is a spelling assessment. If I ask you to spell a word, I know you can read it. So in many ways, statistically, spelling is a conservative measure of what students know. So when I give a spelling inventory, and we have particular spelling inventories that we've developed over the years, I choose a spelling inventory, then I analyze the child's spelling, and then I create, as a classroom teacher, I create a classroom profile that then helps me to think about differentiating instruction. Now, you as parents of children with special needs may understand this movement towards differentiation. And we want to differentiate our spelling instruction and our phonics instruction according to the developmental model that you just saw. At the end of this talk, you'll see our references and you'll see some slides of some books, but this is a page from our book looking at a particular spelling inventory. And we'll look at inventories. Here's one now. Here's Jake's spelling inventory, and we're scoring his spelling from the easiest word to the hardest word. And then we know what words he misspelled, but if you go to the next slide, we can also see what features the children are spelling correctly. And we call this a feature analysis. And this helps me to analyze what phonics features to work on. And then this shows me what stage of development the child is in. I have some better slides here. This child has spelled the primary spelling list that just goes from the word fan all the way to the word riding. You can see that the child spelled the word fan correctly, but spelled pet with an A and rob with a U. And these are predictable. And when we go down, we see that the first place with where the child missed 2 or more is where we begin instruction, and that is with short vowels. And in terms of stages, that child is in the middle letter name. And what that tells me as a teacher and parent is what materials I want to use for my phonics instruction. This is another feature guide that has another list that goes from bed to opposition. And again, the first place where the child misses 2 or more is where we run our finger up, and that tells us where to begin instruction. This is a class profile that a teacher would create. And here is another class profile that I created for a 3rd grade classroom. The point here is that these are spelling behaviors, and these are groups that we've developed based on the profile. The thing to point out here is that these are spelling groups, but they are also my word study groups. Because remember, there is that synchrony among reading, writing, and spelling. And so we can look at the child's reading by looking at her spelling. So when we think of our 3 groups in a 2nd grade classroom, these are 3 reading groups and 3 spelling groups. We don't want the spelling to be like it used to be, where you just memorize and forget the words. We see spelling as a phonics and vocabulary activity, and an activity that must be differentiated according to the development of the children. Now these slides are hard to read, but you will find them on page 7 of our handout at the UNR website, and this will show you some of the levels that we're going to find when we do these assessments. This is more for teachers, and I think I'll save us time by passing this over. But teachers administer the spelling inventory 3 or 4 times a year to track the children's progress in their phonics, spelling, and vocabulary. So here's a child in September and in December. This is another feature, that same feature guide that we looked at earlier. And I think that's all I want to talk about with assessment. Before we go on, I was wondering if there are any questions, anything that Mina wants to say, or if we have any sense of the audience, their needs at this point.
You know, at this point, Dr. Barrett, it seems really nice that you have reiterated over and over we're looking at development and that we have to individualize the spelling and the word study so that it's at their developmental stage, because that's what we're seeing with this population is, yes, they can learn it. They're just a little bit slower sometimes in picking it up, and so it's just a development thing. Just give them more time, more intense instruction, and they'll be there, which is going to be really exciting.
Yes, you know, the word "just" is problematic because you know as well as I that we have to have more more instruction. And as you know, Mina, also in our reading center, we have the difficulty of at school the children may be, the child may be working on short vowels and being asked to work on long vowels, and the child's not ready for it. As a matter of fact, when we teach too far above where the children are at, we're actually doing them harm. So yes, I agree that we do want to look at the children's development, and we are going to focus on word study in a lot of our talking today, but I want to put word study in perspective. We implement the essential components in our tutoring that the National Reading Panel developed or found to be important in their research. And so I call it ROOT. Read to, read with, write with, word study, and talk with. So if in a tutoring program or in a school program, you're looking for those aspects. So for example, we do see in the literature among some children and groups that the children are delayed in their speech development. So we do want to look at talking with children. For a lot of my tutoring, we're looking at read with and word study. For a lot of your work at home, families, you do want to look at reading to your children and plenty of talking with your children. So this is what read to will look like, of course. We want those favorite books, reading to kids in school, reading with children, supporting them as they read. We want to write with children and give them the feeling that they really are writers and not concentrate too much on correctness in first draft writing. And then we go on to the word study. Now, word study may be a new term for you, but it's it goes back a ways now, but in modern times we're looking at the past 20 years, and mostly our work has been helping people to see what word study is. And so word study is not materials. You can use any materials, but it's an approach to thinking about phonics and spelling and vocabulary. And so here's a teacher in Minneapolis, St. Paul rather, and she's doing a picture sort. And then you can see later on that she's going to be doing a word sort. Or this child is at her seat sorting her words by middle sound, short A and long A. And here's a second grade teacher working with word sorts with a small group of kids, about 1/3 of her students. So here's the magic formula, if you will, for what is word study. So when you're teaching phonics and vocabulary, you're also teaching spelling, and it all fits together. We are buying instructional time. And I think I'll let you read these on your own, but the research does support why we are explicit in our word study. You must have quick recognition of words in order to read in an adult way, and this means that you have to have a very good word knowledge store, if you will, and knowledge about how words work, not just of particular words, but of word patterns as well. So here's some other points to consider in terms of research. I'll let you go back at another time and look at these points in more detail. The last point is sort of what we're known for, is that our word study is active. It involves manipulation, it involves talking, and it involves students working together with their teachers. It's not just a workbook page, and it's not just memorization. And again, word study addresses these 3 layers of the writing system. And these are sort of 25 skills. There are more, but these are sort of 25 skills that you can see that follow from the sound layer, the phonology, to the writing system, to the morphology, which is the meaning system of the writing. That would include roots and prefixes and suffixes, Greek and Latin roots, and stems, Latin stems. So here are some children sorting on the floor of their second grade classroom. We want to re-envision how we're teaching spelling. Spelling is just one type of word study activity. So now I think we are ready to walk through the 5 stages. I have actually 5 slides open that I really don't want to read to you. Rather, we're going to show them to you. But again, you can come back to these 5 slides, and this is going to be the format of these slides. The first is the stage itself, the letter name stage, the second stage, and then what do we study during the stage, and then some examples. Some of these are oriented towards second language learners, but we also find, for example, that some of our population in this study have difficulties with CH and SH and blends and digraphs, and we'll come back to that later. So there's the third stage where we're looking on long vowels. And here's the fourth stage where we're looking at 2-syllable words. And finally, the 5th stage. And just a joke here, but this stage goes to age 100. As long as we're in good health, we're always looking to learn about words. In terms of vocabulary, vocabulary comes early on from the home, where children are talked to. By school age, some children have heard 30 million more words than other children. And by this stage, the derivational relation stage, all the new vocabulary that they learn comes from reading. And so this is an important source for their vocabulary development. By 6th grade, 7th grade on, except for cuss words and slang, all the new vocabulary that children learn comes from reading. So in our teaching, these are some of the basic activities that we want to teach our teachers and that we want to teach our children. So now we're up to the emergent stage, and this stage goes from 1 to 7, and you can see some of the emergent writing. And here's my 2-fisted simian grip Head Start kid, a 4-year-old. And here's some early writing by a 27-month-old. There's a dinosaur and her sister's fork. And here's a progression of writing from scribbling as we see going further. Here's a sort that a preschooler did, sorting by colors, it seems like. There's a big blob of blue in the middle. And so at this stage, we are doing something that we call concept sorts that encourages language and thought development. Mathematical relations as well as conceptual and language relations. Here are toys and food and clothing to sort. And here are animals to sort, and kids, babies, will sort them by animals I like and animals I don't like, or 4 legs and no legs, etc. Here's a child getting used to the alphabet, uppercase and lowercase letters. That's called alphabet eggs. And this is probably, my teacher called it the miracle of reading. If this is what gets kids going in their literacy, and quite frankly, kids will not learn a whole lot about phonics until they have a concept of word. And we call this COW, C-O-W, concept of word. And in our research, we look at 3 levels of COW. developing, rudimentary, and full. And we have children who memorize little rhymes and ditties like 1, 2, buckle my shoe. And then they come up to something that they've memorized. And remember that miracle of reading. They come up to this little ditty and they go, 1, 2, buckle my. That's what that child did. We don't talk in words. This is hard to realize. We talk in phrases, buckle my. We talk in breath groups, but we don't talk in words. So that we talk in syllables as well. So this child could have gone 1, 2, buckle, and been pointing to my when saying co. So this child, until she could point accurately, she would not be learning many sight words, and she would not be learning phonics. Now, I understand that we may have some parents of young children in the audience, and this is very important for you guys. Some of our latest research is looking at these babies, these pre-K kids, and getting these kids to see the rhythmic structure of their work. I'm sorry, somebody may want to put themselves on mute there. So this child is pointing to the words, but I'm telling you, singing songs with your children, pointing to text, and dancing to the rhythm of language is going to be very important for your pre-K children. There's a good researcher in England named Goswami, Goswami. She also does work with kids with Turner syndrome, but also looks at children with language and learning difficulties. And she, too, is tapping into this rhythmic structure for the babies. And so this child is learning about the concept of word. And when she does it, she'll be collecting sight words. Here's a kindergarten teacher looking at something called onset and rhyme, M-A-P. And that's an activity that the children will do on their own. And here's a child spelling of bed, ship, drive, bump, when. That drive, that J. When you say drive, it feels like a J. And families, this is a new concept for many people. We want the children to say the words when they're analyzing them. And so when they analyze them and say the word aloud, they can feel how J and DR are so much alike. And notice that this child is not using vowels. English speakers at this early stage are not putting vowels into their writing yet. And that we work very hard on these children collecting a sight vocabulary. And so this is called a word bank. And this child is sorting pictures of words that begin, in this case, with a P. You can see P for pointing, P for peanut butter, P for pajamas. And Mina, do you go ahead? I've been talking a lot. Do you go ahead? Do you want to take
Sorry, I was actually focusing on a couple of questions. Do you mind if I just answer those right now? Would that be okay? All right. We had a question about the spelling tests, and they are regularly given in the classroom. They don't have to be pulled out by a specialist to do them. Most teachers give a test at the beginning, and a lot of them use this exact spelling test at the beginning of the year, and then they'll give them a couple of times through the year. So if you talk to the teachers, they'll know exactly what you're talking about because they're fairly common. And then the other question was about if you have an adult who is still struggling with reading but is a strong speller. Again, it's a developmental stage, and so you would want to assess, even though assessing using their spelling and maybe some other reading inventories, it's still developmental no matter what age you're at. So the instruction would still be focused on their exact development, not on their age.
Now, it does get to be a little tricky with the adults, because sometimes with the adults who are still remedial readers, they can fool us a little bit because they've memorized some spellings of words beyond their development. But usually, as long as we have enough spelling errors, we can figure out what stage they're in, just as Mina was saying. The slide we see in front of us is a child who's working on beginning sounds. So remember, going back to the previous slide, this child would have spelled bed, BD, or ship, SP. And so this child is beginning to look at beginning sounds, as you see here, with beginning M, B, and R, and S. And this next child is sorting by beginning consonants with picture sorts in a kindergarten classroom. Now, this is an area that we see with many of our population in this study having difficulties with hard sounds like CH and TH. And so we can see that in their spelling that this would be a good thing to work on. We have a case here, and this is a first grader and who is working with some occupational therapy for handwriting. And this child had some early speech delays, and she is in, this is not her real name, but she is in first grade, and she's a little older. You can see she's memorized the silent E rule, maybe plugging in a rule, fine, a word, fine, but this is unusual. We don't see FI for FA, nor do we see an I for pet, but we do see an A for pet. That makes a lot of sense. Same with dice. We don't quite get the ICE. Sometimes older students plug in sounds or plug in words that they just think belong there. But again, we're looking at the word number 4, and we see rob, the P, and number 5, the P in hope. And so this child is sort of spitting at the page. She has the STK for stick, and the SI and N for shine, and gum, the OU. And so developmentally, this child is still going to work with short vowels in her word study. This is the same child. And we see that nearly all spellings make sense. Here's bed. This is the second list, and the A makes great sense, but she has overlearned the silent E and just seems to be plugging in it. When in doubt, put an E. So we could have stopped earlier with this child with the number of errors, but the spelling tells us what kind of phonics to look at, and here's a scoring guide for this child. And so she's in the letter name stage, where she might write this sentence. We know that men are hippos, but she would have written, hippos are mean, M-E-N. And for children at this level, we might do what we call personal readers, where we take little rhymes like this one, crackers and crumbs, crackers and crumbs. These are my fingers, these are my thumbs. And we type, these are my eyes, these are my ears. They will all grow big in the next 10 years. It's by a woman named Dunn, and you can find this book at Stenhouse Publishers. And I typed this little poem up into 26 points, and the child rereads it and collects sight words. And we also use these sight words for phonics. Here's a dictation by a child that I would then type up later on and put it into a little notebook for rereading. Here I am working with a group of first graders and my students, and we're singing the Caps for Sale song with the that book called Caps for Sale. And here's the child who is rereading it in her personal reader. And the kids love these. They're sociable, they memorize them, and they point slowly to them. These are beginning readers. And Sarah was the owner of this one, and you can see that she invented a base 4 counting system. Every time she saw it, she put a little tick mark. And so she had read this 16 times by this point. And that's how you learn sight words, with plenty of reading. I want to show you 3 slides that sort of shows you how we do word study. And if you can do these 3 slides as a teacher or a tutor, you sort of have word study down. And this is true for all levels. It doesn't have to be with beginning consonants and blends, but the teacher just prior to this had demonstrated the sort, and you see that here. And now the child is doing the sort herself, S, SH, and H. And then she's writing the sort into her word study notebook, and then she's playing a game. And so if we can do these 3 activities where the children sort, and then they sort themselves, and then we watch them sort, and then they write the words in their word study notebook and write other words that fit the pattern, and then they play games, and any card game, any board game can be a word study game. And that's what you're seeing, whether it's with 6th graders or 1st graders. This child is playing letter spin, just learning the letters of the alphabet, and probably lived in Nevada a little too long, needing a spinner all the time. Here's a teacher working with a small group of kids doing a word sort. And here's a word sort for beginning sounds N and P. And here's a word family sort for the beginning readers as well. A word study notebook. And this is also a word study notebook, a different child at a higher level of development. Do you want to take this one for us, Mina? This is a child named Abby.
Sure, that'd be fine. So we're looking at 5th grade. She's already got assistance with literacy, but she had a great deal of speech anomalies. And remember, Dr. Bear pointed out, if they have speech delays or anomalies at age 4, there's a really high chance of having literacy concerns later. So here's our spelling test. Now remember, we're talking 5th grade. So you immediately, by your 2nd word, you've got an alarm going off that we've got a concern with some short vowels as she goes in, and then you see again the substitution of the short vowels. She does have the MP on lump, which is really good, but she's missing some of the blends, like with train. She left the R out.
Now, except for a few of these errors are exactly what we would expect from a child at the middle within word pattern stage, no matter what their grade level or age. Usually we see this in 1st grade and 2nd grade, but these errors are not weird. They are developmentally delayed, and that means that the program of instruction is quite clear for us.
Right, which makes it nice for the child. They won't be frustrated by things being above them. And so, Dr. Bear, what would you like to push to emphasize on this slide? Obviously, by the time she got to the end, she was at her frustration level. So these samples don't really show us as much as the earlier samples, like her substitution of the F for the V in favor.
Yes,
and that kind of thing.
18.
But
yes,
ripen is predictable. She was hearing it. She was just, she messed the letters up a bit.
Now, even though this is at her frustration level, we don't see other children spelling pleasure, even though it's hard. And this is sort of a question about this population. We don't see B for P at this late date. We don't see confident with the CUF quite like that. So some of these are interesting to us, and we're looking at them in more detail, and I think they're related to the children's overall language delay. But what's interesting in this one, you see, is that this child was in 5th grade. Her reading comprehension on a standardized reading test was 5.1. So she's a bright enough child verbally. She can maintain her own, so to speak, in a 5th grade classroom. But look up here in the broad reading, but look at the word attack is down to 2.5. And so while she has good oral language comprehension, let's say, the phonics is quite delayed. Mina, okay?
Yes, and which makes it really important that you keep her in services, because even if they average these tests, the fact that her comprehension is high doesn't mean that she can read things independently, because her word attack isn't there.
It does tell us, and we'll come to this, that we want a lot of language through the ear hole, a lot of books on tape, a lot of reading to this child until the phonics catches up. And if we look backwards, this is that same child in 3rd grade. Fan, pet, dig, rob. So sometimes people aren't very good at looking at development, and this is a good case in point of watching the child from 3rd grade here and following it up to the slides we were looking at earlier, which was 5th grade. And we can mark children's development. This is the next stage, and we like to say that children are using but confusing long vowel patterns, and that's what you see here. And these children are transitional readers. Nate the Great, Dinosaur Days, all the way to Junabe Jones and Horrible Harry. They are doing long vowel sorts like this one, with the consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant in the middle. And they're looking at the patterns of words. This is a lot to take in, families, but there were 3 layers: alphabet or sound, pattern, meaning. And we are now playing with the patterns of words. Consonant, vowel, consonant, and these are terms that we use with the children. And these 2 children are looking at long O, long A, and short A and short O. And then they'll start taking these words apart and start looking at the patterns of words. And they play games. Gaming, active learning, is an important part of our word study. So in a classroom, we'll make 3 copies of the same game, like a racetrack game. And all of these materials are in the books that you'll see at the end of this talk. And now we're up to Caroline, who was in 7th grade, had difficulty processing sounds. Often children are tested with nonsense syllables, and that seemed to be where it showed up. But here's our spelling inventory. She's a little further ahead. Mina?
Yeah, the syllable and affixes stages are a wonderful stage for them, because they start getting a lot of the simpler words, but it's for her to be trying to read 7th grade material and write at a 7th grade level, it would be really important that all of her instruction be developmental and be at this stage for her. You can see she's got marched, she's got shower, but when we got to bottle, she didn't get she has the sounds, she has the L, but it's coming before the T. So she wasn't at that point yet where she heard the 2 separate syllables there. She did very well with it, though.
Yes, and some of the sound discrimination is interesting. Why she didn't mark the 2nd syllable in bottle is a little bothersome. Or going back even to the previous, children usually spell float correctly by this point, or don't usually put an ES at the end. So we are finding that this particular population has sometimes trouble with the ending sounds, particularly ending digraphs and blends. But this child is making progress, and you can see that she gives out by word number 20. This is a 9th grader who was diagnosed as early as 1st grade.
It is unusual with SPOIL, though, that she put the SPB, and I think, Dr. Baer, you had pointed out to me that she should have by sight recognized that that is not a pattern, that you referred to it as an illegal spelling, that is not a pattern she would have ever seen in writing. And so the SPB, she should have actually screened herself.
That's right. That's right. But for the most part, her errors are just what we would expect of a child at this developmental stage. Now, she's in 9th grade, and so there are many 9th graders who are way ahead of her. But we would want to look at her reading. It would probably be delayed as were most of the kids in our sample. And so you can see as we go further, she is disloyal. She called this local. The C doesn't make much sense there. But we are getting at a frustration level. Number 4 is interesting, the lack of the R in scrape. Usually we see that represented. And so now we're looking, the family said she just wanted to keep on doing it. These are hard words, but I'm working with a sample right now of 7th graders who are all spelling these words correctly. So we would say that there is a need for this population at this age level to think of transitioning out of that transitional stage and out of that early intermediate stage. We find that a lot of children sort of get stuck at this level, like this child. She has difficulty with polysyllabic words, as you see with visible, number 18, and fortunate, dropping that ending sound, but also still with simple digraphs like shaving, number 6, or the TCH in scratches. So if there were a special need, I would be doing more word study on some of these patterns that you see here, and then come back to these patterns later on. At the same time, we have to fill this child's life with the good things that she needs to learn about in school, the content areas, the math, the social studies, the science. We also need to get her turned on to books. So we need these children to do repeated reading for fluency. We want them to be involved in word study at their developmental levels. And as these kids get older, we want to think about a ton of activities to help with what we call success in school. This is something that we've written about and that others are certainly working on. We have the Deschlers in Kansas, University of Kansas, who do good work at the upper levels. But this is sort of a black hole for our middle school students. They sort of get stuck at reading at a 3rd or 4th or maybe a 5th grade level, but let's just say a 3rd, 4th grade level. And it often sounds like they're burping when they're reading. They're trying to get a head of steam up to read with some fluency, but their word knowledge is not up to the task. And that's where remediation comes in. But where we also come in as families and as teachers and as tutors is just with help and success in school. So as I said in the previous slide, but also down to the next to last slide bullet here, we want the kids to be technically good at word processing, or maybe, if depending on their level, use that program called Dragon Speak. We want them to have books on tape. We want them to listen to language. They need more time to take tests. They need often a 504 designation in school. Anything you want to add in this list, Mina? This is just a beginning list, and we can give you more details.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful list, and it certainly gives a guide for both parents at home as well as they could share with the teachers, because the books on tape and reading to the child, all children need to be read to even after they know how to read, but I think this population especially benefits from hearing it, you know, when you're in the car or wherever.
They need it, and they need the social reinforcement, because at school, some kids are too shy, and that when they're behind, once you're in the hole, it's hard to climb out. And so having a talk about it at home or with a tutor, or just creating these interests that allow children to succeed in school will be helpful. If they're studying world history, find something in world history to turn the child on, state history, etc. This is an important aspect for their learning at this point. Okay, let me go ahead and plug it back into my power grid here.
Dr.
And,
Baer, while you're doing that, could I just answer a question that came through? Now, tell me if you disagree with this. We have a family listening tonight who has a 2.5-year-old, and it's a dual language family, and they were wondering, is this beneficial to the child, or should they not? And I don't have a lot of knowledge in this, so I'll defer to you, but I did overhear Dr. Tartaglia of the Extraordinary Kids Clinic answer this question for a parent of a sex chromosome anomaly child, and she said, expose them. Go ahead, expose them to both languages, but if the child starts coming up to the point that they're getting frustrated, and you're seeing a lot of frustration, and most children, I think, when they're developing 2 languages, are a little delayed, but then they get it and they're ahead of the game on everything. But if the child is showing a lot of frustration, she said, then you'd have to choose which one to do. But it was her opinion that you needed to let them try. And we've had a lot of people, even in our study, we had children who are, the family isn't dual language, but the children are living in other countries, and they're dealing with it very well. And so that's the information that I can bring to the question. So now I can let you, Dr. Baer, comment on it.
Thanks. Your answer was great. I would add that particularly at these younger levels, that natural predisposition for learning language is so much there that we want to encourage it. I don't think you'll see a problem with the oral language. The more languages we have, the smarter we are, not just in language, but in other cognitive tasks. There have been some wonderful studies just recently with this area. In literacy, I look at it, and again, I have that similar caution when sound symbol correspondence is being addressed and it comes in slowly, then take a look at it and maybe just go slowly. There's every reason to work on beginning consonants in Spanish the same way you would work on beginning consonants in English or whatever language. So I would not avoid it. But if it becomes really problematic, then maybe just slowing it down and reconsidering how much you're trying to cover at a given time. Great question. If not, then if there aren't other questions, we'll go up to upper level. It's quite a jump from that 2.5-year-old, however. But let's go ahead and press on. Is that okay?
I think that sounds great. We didn't have any other questions, so.
Good, and that is a great question with the bilingual. I would encourage it. The first stage, there are 2 stages in this upper level. One stage is called the syllables and affixes stage, and that goes with the intermediate stage of reading. And so we're looking at the last 2 stages of spelling and the last 2 stages of reading. And these children in the intermediate stage are reading fluently and silently for the most part. They can still dig reading aloud. But they're developing a variety of reading styles. This is when they're also getting into study skills and where school reading becomes so much more important. And in schools, as you're noticing, we have so much more nonfiction material coming into the grade levels. So during this stage, in terms of phonics, spelling, and vocabulary, in terms of phonics and spelling, we look at 2-syllable words. At the top, this is a 4th grade classroom. We're looking at cheering, no change in the spelling, whereas the second column has a doublet that we did add an N, and in the third column we have the E drop. And so these are 3 patterns that kids who are in the as early as 1st grade, but this is a 4th grade, 3rd grade. That's typically when we'll address the skill, but I do work with remedial readers who are in 6th grade and 8th grade who are still looking at these aspects of how 2-syllable words combine. And so earlier we saw that child dropping off the ED ending and I think adding an ES. This is when we would address that issue with this child. And so here's another sort, same sort of principle. Now we're getting into the hip area, if you will, that is called morphology. And this is where we're looking at etymologies and the history of words and the structure of words. We start with easy prefixes and suffixes and how words, syllables are combined. And so the first area is called inflected morphology, the E-D-I-N-G. And then gradually we get to the roots and derivations and the harder prefixes and suffixes. Mina, I'll go ahead and go a little bit further.
Sure, that's great. Yeah.
And so how do we combine syllables? We have unbreakable, breakable, break. And so prefixes and suffixes. This is very easy word combining. And so this student is a little further ahead, and what's impressive about this student, if I'm right, Mina, is that this child, Jenny, had a lot of TLC, a lot of support from her family and from her tutors, and in school and outside of school. So she was an unusually strong achiever, given some of our other children in this population.
That's right. She had a great deal of opportunity and support.
These are her spellings, so that you can see how nicely she's doing in 7th grader, as a 7th grader. We'll go on a little further. The hardest word is succession. And again, these errors make great sense. These are not random. The correspondence, the E-N-C-E, is a little bothersome, but we'll take a look at this as she gets older. And so we call this the derivational relation stage. And if you ever watch the National Spelling Bee, these kids are the masters of the stage. And like you and me, they're reading 200 and 250 words per minute. We have a flexible reading style according to the materials that we're reading. Some materials will read quickly and with great speed. Other materials will read more slowly. They're developing a specialized vocabulary. Again, how do you learn your vocabulary at this level? It comes all from reading. And so if you're a parent of a child at this level who is intellectually ready to learn science words, but is not there in terms of her reading, you'll need to work with that child in talking and helping her to see the words that she's learning to say and then internalize them for memorizing, for reading. Here's a student in 6th grade reading the book Tiger Rising and writing this sort into his word study notebook. The words were beginning with D-I-S and M-I-S and P-R-E. And this child will then continue to add words like this to his word study notebook. And as we finish up, we do have another book. We have many other books, but one book is called Vocabulary Their Way, and it focuses on the vocabulary at this upper level. And I'm just going to share with you some of the activities that we have going at this level. We have something called Power Maps. So we have power maps at this level. And this is just a cute activity. If I were doing movies with you, I have power 1, and then you see power 2 and power 3. So we make up these little sorts. This could also come from the content area, in this case biology. So we're trying to teach parents and children how to do these vocabulary types of activities. And what we like to say is that when you're teaching one word, you're teaching 10. And so here we're looking at respect, we're looking at the root spec, we're looking at prefixes and suffixes. Here we're doing a concept sort in science. Combining prefixes and suffixes. And then we're up to the upper levels, and I'm sorry, the content areas. And there's a lot of word study that goes on here. What does hex mean? What does poly mean? What does sub mean? What does DEC mean? Etc. All of these aspects of words have meanings that help the students with their comprehension. If you want to be good in comprehension, it helps if you know the vocabulary. So we're getting to these upper levels of vocabulary study, looking at prefixes. And here are some 5th and 6th graders actively involved in word study, writing the word sorts into their word study notebooks. And families, this is IL words, IM, IR, but going back to the beginning of our talk, this could be beginning B words, words that begin with an R, you name it. They could be pictures of B words or P pictures and R pictures. So word study is pretty much the same across the stages, but it varies with the features. So now I'm doing all the talking, Mina, but this child is now looking at roots of words and doing the sorts. Mina, I'll put these slides up, and why don't you go ahead and take these and add anything you'd like.
Sure, I will, but I need to thank you for doing such a great job with the developmental stuff, because it's so important that when children reach a certain level around 3rd grade that we don't just cut them loose. Well, they can read to themselves. They can do things themselves. And even like you were saying with the derivational readers, your high school student may need help with the science words or the math terms, different things that way, because if they only see it written, they may not know the pronunciation or how it relates to other words. So I'm really glad that you did that. The conclusion here, many of these students experience learning and language difficulties, and remember those are tied together. And so it's Dr. Tartaglia of the Extraordinary Kids Clinic always says these are not the group to say, let's see if they outgrow this. This is a red flag. They've already got a potential for having delays. And so it's important that if they're experiencing those difficulties, we don't wait. Early intervention is better. The synchrony of reading and spelling was observed throughout, with just a few anomalies. The same sample of children with SCA, that sex chromosome anomaly, followed developmental spelling patterns, though they were delayed with that. From a developmental comparison, there were greater than expected unconventional spelling errors, and the deletion and substitution of minimal pairs, particularly the consonants and digraphs and blends and final sounds. So the study supports the philosophy of getting started with RTI, and it's hard to tease out the impact. Like we showed with the one girl, she had a great deal of intervention. I think her mom said, the person who was working with her said, you can either spend money on the tutoring now instead of saving up for college, or you can have her not go to college later because she's not going to have the skills to go if you don't use some of that money now for the tutoring. And they really focused on supporting her skills. And so, again, it was hard to tease out when people are delayed, is it because of the lack of really intense instruction or developmental instruction? Because you can give them tons of instruction, but if it's not at their level, it's not going to help. So I'm done. I blabbed on too long, Dr. Bear. You can go ahead.
No. I think we're good, and I just think we'll go right finally to we'd all benefit from some careful longitudinal studies. And then just share some of the materials. We've just come out with Word Survey, the 5th edition. The 5th edition has a website that goes with it, no longer to the CD, but you go online and you'll get materials as well, and you'll see videos of children working with small groups and teachers in a classroom, all the way from kindergarten through 7th grade.
And Dr. Bear, I am sorry to interrupt you, but as a classroom teacher, I frequently had homeschool children join my classroom. I also had children leave the classroom to go into homeschooling, and parents told me over and over again, when they left my a classroom, they would say, we're going to keep this activity or that activity because the children really liked it, but they consistently wanted to use words their way. So it's good in a classroom, but it's also good in a home study, in a homeschool situation.
That is true. We also have a book called Words Their Way with English Learners, a second edition of that. And these are the materials that I would recommend for a lot of the home use. These are the 5 stages of development, and the sorts are already made up for you. So it allows you to hit the ground running. If I were working particularly with the Words Their Way, I would get this book, and then usually as a classroom teacher, 2 of these. I usually have kids at 2 of these stages, and we use this in our tutoring as well. These are particular materials, but the materials are not the real issue. It's knowing what stage of development your children are in. The materials make it easier, but you can get materials other ways as well.
Right, and we did have a question earlier about the spelling test as to who would administer that. If you get the Words Their Way book, it is in the book, the spelling test, and it scripts it for you. It tells you how to score it. It's all right there.
That's right, and then we also have progress monitoring inventories in these little books as well, to see if the child's ready to move on. These are some references that are related to the variations and education a little bit, and then these are references related mostly to our reading and word study works. Here's that Goswami, one of those Goswami articles for the for the emergent kids I was talking about. Do we have other questions, Amy or Mina?
I haven't seen any others come through.
I haven't received any, but this would be a wonderful time if people have questions, if you want to type it in the chat box.
And also, if people just think about it, Dr. Baer gave out our email addresses earlier in the presentation. So even if you don't think of one tonight, you can email later.
That's right. I'll put those back up.
That's great. We did have a question earlier if you'd be willing to share the web address again. So this is probably a good slide for people to copy down.
You bet.
And thanks, Amy, for the extra time tonight. I know we had signed up for an hour, but being able to just go through it in a relaxed way made it really nice, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's see here. So another option we can see if we can get this to work is if people have questions that they would like to ask, if they can raise their hand. I can go ahead and try to unmute you, and so long as your phone isn't mute, we should be able to hear you talk. To get some different voices in here, if anyone would like to do that, you can go ahead and raise your hand. The other thing that I'll also mention is that Dr. Baer's kind enough to share handouts that he developed and has posted on his website. So that should also be available through KS&A, where we have the webinar, and we'll ultimately have this webinar recording posted. So I think you can access that now, but if not, you can check that out on the web as well. I think we have one person with their hand raised, Lucinda. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and if you want to go ahead and talk, we should be able to hear you. Lucinda, are you there? Okay, maybe she had her hand raised by accident. Is there anyone else who has any questions? I'm not seeing anything come through.
All right, well, great. Thanks, Jim and Amy and everybody who attended tonight, because it was really, really nice to share. And as things come up, make sure to get a hold of us. It's really important that the children are given instruction that's developmental. And so we weren't here promoting a particular product, but just reporting that we had seen the population has developmental delays, and that they do respond to developmental instruction.
You bet.
Thank you
That's
very
right.
much for
Pleasure.
taking the time. And I'll also just make an announcement. I want to leave up this slide if people are still copying down the email addresses. But for those people who are 47 Club members and for those who are interested in joining us for another webinar, our next webinar is going to be on July 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to have someone give a talk on ABA therapy. So if you want to save that date, and you'll receive advertisements soon, but we hope that you can join us. And we didn't receive any other questions, so I'll just thank you again and wish everyone a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mina.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I like that.
This was absolutely terrific. Very well paced, very well delivered, and I'm thrilled that you did it for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.